Hello, I'm David Kram, conductor, artistic director, composer, pianist and educator. I'm here as chair of the Arts Committee of the Rotary Melbourne, who on the 14th of October 2020 asked me to deliver a talk on how could artists and creatives be earning a living in the future. Well, as I could only speak from my own little bubble, I thought I would interview a number of my colleagues and associates from the performing arts. In fact, I was lucky enough to be able to engage the interview services of 5 instrumentalists, 3 conductors, 5 singers, 8 artistic directors, and 4 arts associates and 2 composers, a really good mixture. And the result is the film that you're going to see. I must reiterate that the views expressed in this video are not necessarily that of Rotary. I hope you'll enjoy it, and I hope that it will encourage you to keep talking about this very important topic.
I'm an accountant for the arts and have lots of clients who have been quite badly affected by the pandemic that we find ourselves in. We've started off mainly with a cohort of visual artists for many years, and they were to an extent perhaps not as badly affected as the others, but in the last 10, 15 years we've had a number of musicians and performers and theatre people, backstage people especially. A lot of them came onto the books and doing the best we could for them, and then this pandemic hit March 23, I think. Was the emails just flooded in, to them to say that all their shows have been cancelled, and they were desperately trying to see what they can do. Luckily, the government came up with the JobKeeper assistance, which helped them a little bit if they were eligible. Some weren't.
How will artists earn money in the future? It's a good question. It's always been difficult for myself as a freelance artist to make a living. You're constantly thinking about what the next projects will be, because many of these projects require much longer processes of organisation. But now, certainly since March, all of that just disappeared overnight, which was somewhat traumatic. I think there's going to be much greater competition for the pool of money that's out there. I think a lot of artists in particular are going to have to be much more entrepreneurial about their activities, and I think they're going to have to be much more savvy about the financial side of things as well.
When you think about, say, the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra and the shameful way in which they've been treated by being laid off, how that management ever expects to get the orchestra together in the one room and be able to even look them in the eye. And then you have the implications of that, which is one of the great orchestras in the world, particularly with a fine conductor, it's as good as any, being basically decimated. You can always get another accounting department together, but it's a bit hard to get a horn section, Unless you're one of the very, very few, every artist in the musical world anyway is going to need another job.
Hello, I'm Bernadette Robinson, a singer and performer living in Melbourne, in lockdown Melbourne at present.
My name's Paul Noonan. I'm married to Bernadette. I'm a lawyer these days, but when I met Bernadette, I was a professional musician, and then went back to university and did law subsequently.
One of the reasons that Paul did law was because the arts, particularly performing arts, is always a bit erratic. Since COVID, like so many other performing artists, I have no work and I see no future.
I think it's a desperate situation. I don't think it's being overly dramatic to say that and use that word, because
the arts have been decimated. That's all there is to it.
We need to come to understand the realism of the problem. This is not going to go away. But I will say this, beating the virus is going to actually be about developing strategies that immediately help us to adapt to the way that the virus comes to affect our society. So what can we do? We need to start thinking about new forms.
So what does employment look like for artists in the future? I think something which is very much talking about the present, I suppose, that became really, really apparent to me in the last few months is the lack of lobbying power of the arts industry in general, a unified voice to bring us all together and truly represent the breadth of what being an artist is. I think one thing that we've really learned is the fact that the arts are inevitably continuing to be undervalued in Australian culture, and that nobody's truly recognising the large financial contribution the arts make to business, tourism, employment, also just straight out the smartness of our society.
It's important to look at the present and the past because they actually determine what our actions might be and also what our opportunities might be and also what solutions are available to us. So in my experience, I would say that actually it won't be a disincentive. People are naturally ambitious. Artists are ferociously ambitious. They're not satisfied until the work that they have done is done, and they won't let financial insecurity get in their way.
One word: diversify. We've had to do this over the last 6 months, and we're fortunate that we already did a little bit of that in our lives. But I think going into the future, our larger performing arts sector is somewhat in danger. It already was, and the lockdowns and the crisis only serve to magnify the cracks in that structure, I think. The other thing I would say that we all have to do in music is to concentrate on education. This time has been a real opportunity to see the whole thing as an ecosystem. If we don't invest in music education from the very earliest age, right up through, then I don't know whether we can survive.
I can't really compare the kind of deprivation that I've been through in this lockdown to what my grandparents suffered, but it did bring a measure of understanding that I obviously lacked. And as I said, it triggered something in me, and I had to recover from that. And in that recovery, I realized that there were works to be written. I had a list of commissions that were piling up and deadlines that were looming. And so I had to think, well, how do I get through this? How do I reconnect to my arts practice as a composer, setting aside that of my career as a soprano? How do I reconnect to my compositional voice? And the answer was right there in front of me. I really had to respond to what I was going through right then and there. Something that has, in one way, oddly, has united the world in its experience, and in another way has kept us apart from one another.
The way I've always operated, and there's been positives and negatives about it, is that I've never really thought about the future. I've always been present in the moment, and my career has always been about, oh, I'm doing this right now. I'm not sure what happened behind me. I'm not sure what's going to happen in front of me, but by doing that, something is going to happen, or some door is going to open. So whether the type of artist that didn't have that vaulting ambition to be, the best tenor in the world, I just was in the moment. So I think to say how is an artist or going to earn a living in the future is a really, this is probably one of the few times in my creative life that I've really been confronted by the prospect of, yes, no income. I mean,
it's the ability to adapt and evolve out of this, to take everything back to a micro level. I'm finding that small, very intimate settings are probably going to float to the top. And things returning to ceremonies such as weddings, funerals, memorials, these will be the things that we see musicians thriving in these venues at first. And then also there's this incredible mass exodus of really incredible artists to academia. So artists are now turning into educators. You're still having these incredible mentors that are going to be ushering in the new era of artists. If we can look at the echoes of history, it's that pandemics are temporary.
From the perspective of someone who's always been involved in the heavy music scene, well, the first thing I gotta say is there's often not been a lot of margin in it for us anyway. But of course, the passion is for live music. That's the payoff, and now it's gone. But what are we doing in the meantime to earn a crust? And part of that is live streaming. For example, we worked with a local band called Victoria K. It didn't charge to attend as such, attend online, but we did ask that anyone who could support would do so via a donation just to cover costs, because we did have quite the setup for this one. And, you know, a lot of fans did tune in to watch from Australia and around the world. And, you know, some of them were very generous in their donations.
People who have formerly been working for major performing arts organisations or producing concerts overseas. These two people I'm thinking of particularly have teamed up to create Melbourne Digital Concert Hall, which is a wonderful response to the current situation and has actually been a real lifeline for many of us. Certainly in this household, Melbourne Digital Concert Hall has really made it possible for us to keep paying the rent. This really quite altruistic objective of setting up a way in which artists can reach their audiences online, and for all of the ticket sales, or the majority of the box office, to go to artists, is a wonderful idea. And there's been so many people who've jumped on board who've supported that.
I've been a freelance musician probably for over 20 years now, with a combination of probably 3 strands of work, being teaching, let's call it large ensemble work, and small ensemble work and solo performance. So in terms of the amount of work I've been doing until, let's say, March 2020, it's been about 50-50 performing and teaching. And I feel sort of equally passionate about both of those strands. Because of the Melbourne Digital Concert Hall, a lot of us have had really, great fun and access to online concerts. And I think in a way that's probably been one of the big realizations this year, that people will A, perform online, and B, people will buy tickets and go. And I think that's going to continue, and I hope it does. I've done quite a bit of unpaid work this year, and most musicians do that. I've given quite a few concerts for my neighbours and for my street, which has been actually one of the highlights of my year. And I've played for people in aged care online who can't get out and basically locked in their rooms all day. There's also a lot more time to practice now, which I think a lot of us, usually we complain, oh, I've got no time to practice, I'm so busy, and our bodies can't handle playing 10 hours a day. So now it's it's like, be careful what you wish for.
The Melbourne Digital Concert Hall is another example of the difference between the subsidised juggernauts and real people. So Chris Howlett, who's a wonderful, who had a great business in China, touring China, which lots of our artists went off on to do, and Adele Schonhardt, who works at Musica Viva and is the chairman of 3MBS, I think she's just resigned from Musica Viva, had this great idea to just use digital technology and streaming to get money direct to players, because everyone was just thrown on the scrap heap. And they rang me, I think 2 or 3 days after the lockdown, and said, this is our idea. I said, well, we've got a theatre, let's do it. So between Kawai, who donated a magnificent piano, us who were able to put the theatre up, JobKeeper, which meant we were able to staff the theatre at no cost, and Chris and Adele, who by and large have donated all their time, we were able to provide hundreds of concerts. I forget the number now, but it's hundreds of concerts, whereby at $24 a ticket, $20, so the vast majority of the money goes direct to the players, and the $4 is for, you know, credit card booking fees and a bit of streaming cost with the, you know, use of the line and all the rest of it. So it's up to 750 grand has been raised and gone direct to musicians. Many of them, look, very, very well-known musicians were crying, saying this has paid my rent next month.
So the COVID normal has got to deal with this need for separation. Redesigning theatres is only going to take you so far because the economics are very difficult to work out. Open air may allow the more popular music forms. Another thing I think we might have forgotten about is that when John Truscott designed the Arts Centre, it was for a population whose life expectancy is actually lower than the median age of people who go to afternoon concerts at the Arts Centre. And so we have spaces that are not designed for an ageing population. The other group that I have quite a bit to do with through my board membership of Polyglot Theatre is the very young. Children are becoming used to screens, obviously, from a very early age, but cognitively, there is no substitute for getting one's hands onto actual things. And this has been something that Polyglot Theatre in particular, with its emphasis on the child as a creator of its own theatrical experience, is vital to preserve.
The other thing I would say that we all have to do in music is to concentrate on education, music education, and in whatever capacity we're capable of delivering, whether we teach or tutor or mentor or just advocate and lobby and even fundraise for, because this time has been a real opportunity to see the whole thing as an ecosystem, but it's never been more true than ever that if we don't invest in music education from the very earliest age right up through, then I don't know whether we can survive. And we have to all look after each other, see how we can support each other with money, with resources, with networks, with administrative collaboration, diversity, collaboration, education. They're my three answers to the question.
Just elaborating a bit on what Monica was talking about, ecosystems. You know, for example, as a festival, as Port Fairy Spring Music Festival, we're always thinking about our ecosystem as the people who live in Port Fairy and also the people who come to Port Fairy every year for the festival, but particularly those who live in Port Fairy who may not have had access to the festival in the past for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't think that that it was necessarily their cup of tea, and certainly many students in the shire of that Port Fairy finds itself in, which is the Moyne Shire, and in nearby Warrnambool, the city of Warrnambool. This is our ecosystem.
So I think that for a start, there'll be no international work, for sure, for Australian-based artists. The upside of that is that there won't be any international artists coming to Australia. This is an extraordinary situation. It's the first independent Ring of the Nibelungen since 1913. As you know, it's the apex of any opera company's career to present the Ring. We're in a great position to be able to start it with Rheingold in February. All Australian cast, all Victorian cast, very generously supported by Hans Henkel. There's not the slightest chance we'd be able to do these productions without an extraordinary level of support from an individual who's very modest but does an enormous amount for the opera scene in Australia. And we're starting it in February. We'll be the first major production back in the Regent. They've moved the dress circle forward. Because of the social distancing, we'll be able to spill the orchestra out into the stalls. Most of the audience will then be seated in the dress circle, but we expect we'll able to accommodate between 700 and 800 people. Because of our structure, 700 or 800 people at a performance is quite viable financially.
I remember when I was a student at the VCA in the 80s that Rupert Hamer, who was the premier of the state, walked around the VCA. Now, political parties aside, this was an endorsement. You know, as I look back, you young people are of value to society because I'm here. I'm walking around this place because I care.
There's a kind of the prevailing conditions, which are essentially social and political settings, which are working against the artist and their capacity to financially sustain themselves. So one of the things that I have been looking at quite a lot over the last sort of 7 or 8 years is this sort of the idea of the living wage for an artist. In this space, there are a number of sort of variations on the theme, which are encapsulated more broadly in the idea of a universal basic income. And if you look actually at the JobKeeper system, in some ways that was a fairly good version of a universal basic income, a good relative in the family of universal basic income. So why is it important? Largely because the current settings within the arts sector, in terms of advocacy, in terms of funding, will not offer sustenance for the artist over the next 5 years. UBI does a number of things. It promises to restore some of the dignity of the artist's life. So that's very important in terms of equity. It actually places us in a level playing field across society, and that is something that we're not at the moment. We're pretty much down the bottom of the food chain, and we can't scrabble up from where we are without conceptual help and without whole of government help.
Well, COVID's certainly thrown up some extraordinary confronting things for artists and freelance artists to deal with. I was feeling particularly frustrated, not just for myself, but also for a number of artists that I've been working with, because there was a large requirement on people to dream up projects very quickly. Suddenly there were rapid response grants, but they were grants for a whole new world that we didn't know whether it was going to be in place for 6 months, 12 months, or for eternity. Suddenly everyone's making digital online concerts and theatre and all of these things, which frankly is not what theatre and concerts and acoustic music are made to do. So if that is the direction that kind of smart thinking is going to go into, then we really, really need time to work and develop that to make it a really, really viable art form, rather than just suddenly going, snap, okay, and now take all of your plays, operas, and whatever you were thinking of doing and do it on Zoom.
I think I'm going to say a return after this to what most musicians set out with, and this is a great desire to tell their truth through this powerful medium of music. But really, what I'm hoping our industry, our creatives, my colleagues will understand on a much deeper level, understand on a level that only experience can afford us, this level of understanding, that what we do is actually essential to our way of being here. And that notion really, I have to say, is for me, it's written into my DNA. It may sound odd to be saying this, but I am really optimistic that on the other side of this, we have an opportunity to reimagine how we create our art together, and to also recognize, some of us perhaps for the first time, how essential what we do is to the broader fabric of society.
At this time of pandemic, it's really important, I think, to be reevaluating and that value of the arts. What do the arts and artists do? Those words are so powerful. We need to claim those words and not be embarrassed by them. And I think there's been an incredible erosion of those words and the work of the kind of creative industry words, because there's an implication there that, you know, arts have to generate money. Now, we all know that the arts do generate money, but not always. And there is incredible value in art in our society, which is made by artists, which is made by people who is not touched by a child playing a piano piece or a recorder piece or making something up on GarageBand. What family does not glow with pride at that experience of being in the same room as someone giving?
But it's also being able to get together and perform and not being in a lockdown situation. And so taking the opportunity during these moments when we can't be together to create step by step how we can come back together as safely as possible.
I think the blur between pop culture and art, they inform each other. But I think definitely the art informs popular culture more than people actually give credit.
Why can't there be a basic minimum wage for artists, therefore? Why not defund some of the organisations that exist to lobby for the arts, because it's proven that they're actually failing?
There are many people who we know personally who are much more likely to vote for the Conservative parties, who are very passionate supporters of the arts in a private capacity. And Melbourne's a really fantastic example of private philanthropy.
Music needs you. You need music. And all right, there isn't an employer in that equation anymore for you, but you can find your way forward, as many have had to, as I've certainly had to.
Chamber concerts and soirees, and bring it and bring this back. And I must say, there is nothing more invigorating than doing these small recital type chamber things.
When you actually have the show there, you've got the artist there on stage, you've got the crowd going wild, you've got, you know, the smell of spilled beer and all those fun things that come along with being in a gig.
A lot of things had already been started in the past, like crowdfunding and things like that. I think in the future that's going to be the way to go.
But I also did events for very wealthy people for their special parties and things. And that's how I got to know a few of the people who ended up becoming my angel investors.
We're lucky to be in a position to go ahead without risking the viability of the company. Of necessity, because we're unsubsidised, has been the story for the last 20 years.
Preserve and protect and value the need for hands-on live people in live space with live performers and, frankly, live money.
2020 has been an ordinary time for artists. We've largely been left out of most of the new programs, excised for the main part from Job Keeper, and certainly in the recent budget left out of any of the new kind of initiatives.
There's many countries around the world who give more than 2 or 3 times the amount of arts funding per capita.
The visual arts, anecdotally, we've found out that things aren't as bad as perhaps the performing arts there. And one of my great friends who's an artist, Matthew Johnson, he called this lockdown an introvert's paradise.
Art heals. Art gives pleasure. Art is good for mental health. Art is life-affirming. You know, these things are also really important now.
I've got quite a few friends living in Switzerland and Germany, and they've done some really good socially distanced concerts.
I have a dream of a new portfolio in Canberra that is health, arts and education all together.